The American airborne landings in Normandy were the first United States combat operations during Operation Overlord, the invasion of Normandy by the Western Allies on June 6, 1944. Around 13,100 paratroopers of the U.S. 82nd Airborne and 101st Airborne Divisions made night parachute drops early on D-Day, June 6, followed by 3,937 glider troops flown in by day. As the opening maneuver of Operation Neptune, the American airborne divisions were delivered to the continent in 2 parachute and 6 glider missions. Both divisions were part of the U.S. 7th Corps and provided its support in its mission of capturing Cherbourg as soon as possible to provide the Allies with a port of supply. The specific missions of the airborne divisions were to block approaches into the vicinity of the amphibious landing at Utah Beach, to capture causeway exits off the beaches, and to establish crossings over the Douve River at Carrington to assist the U.S. 5th Corps in merging the 2 American beachheads. The assault did not succeed in blocking the approaches to Utah for 3 days. Numerous factors played a part, most of which dealt with excessive scattering of the drops. Despite this, German forces were unable to exploit the chaos. Many German units made a tenacious defense of their strong points, but all were systematically defeated within the week. Background. Except where footnoted, information in this article is from the USAF official history. Warren, Airborne Operations in World War II. European theater, plans and revisions. Plans for the invasion of France went through several preliminary phases during 1943, during which the combined chiefs of staff allocated 13.5 U.S. troop carrier groups to an undefined airborne assault. The actual size, objectives, and details of the plan were not drawn up until after General Dwight D. Eisenhower became Supreme Allied Commander in January 1944. In mid-February, Eisenhower received word from headquarters U.S. Army Air Forces that the TO&E of the C-47 Skytrain groups would be increased from 52 to 64 aircraft by April 1 to meet his requirements. At the same time, the U.S. 1st Army Commander, Lieutenant General Omar N. Bradley, won approval of a plan to land 2 airborne divisions on the Cotentin Peninsula, one to seize the beach causeways and block the eastern half at Carrington from German reinforcements, the other to block the western corridor at La Haye-du-Puy in a second lift. The exposed and perilous nature of the La Haye-du-Puy mission was assigned to the combat veteran 82nd Airborne Division, while the Causeway mission was given to the untested 101st, which received a new commander in March, Major General Maxwell D. Taylor. Bradley insisted that 75% of the airborne assault be delivered by gliders for concentration of forces, because it would be unsupported by naval and corps artillery. The commander of the 82nd Airborne, Maj. Gen. Matthew B. Ridgway, also wanted a glider assault to deliver his organic artillery. On April 28 the plan was changed. The entire assault force would be inserted by parachute drop at night in one lift, with gliders providing reinforcement during the day. The Germans, who had neglected to fortify Normandy, began constructing defenses and obstacles against airborne assault in the Cotentin, including specifically the planned drop zones of the 82nd. At first no change in plans were made, but when significant German forces were moved into the Cotentin in mid-May, the drop zones of the 82nd were relocated, even though detailed plans had already been formulated and training had proceeded based on them. Just 10 days before D-Day, a compromise was reached. Because of the heavier German presence, 1st Army wanted the 82nd landed close to the 101st for mutual support if needed. 7th Corps, however, wanted the drops made west of the Murderette to seize a bridgehead. On May 27, the drop zones were relocated 10 miles east of La Haye-du-Puy along both sides of the Murderette. The 101st Airborne's 501st PIR, which had originally been given the task of capturing Saint-Mère-Église, was shifted to protect the Carentan flank, and the capture of Saint-Mère-Église was assigned to the 505th PIR of the 82nd. For the troop carriers, experiences in the invasion of Sicily dictated a route that avoided Allied naval forces and German anti-aircraft defences along the eastern shore of the Cotentin. On April 12 a route was approved that would depart England at Portland Bill, fly at low altitude southwest over water, then turn 90 degrees to the southeast and come in, by the back door, over the western coast. At the initial point the 82nd would continue straight to La Haye-du-Puy, and the 101st would make a small left turn and fly to Utah Beach. The plan called for a right turn after drops and a return on the reciprocal route. However, the change in drop zones on May 27 and the increased size of German defences made the risk to the planes from ground fire much greater, and the routes were modified so that the 101st would fly a more southerly ingress route along the Douve River. Over the reluctance of the naval commanders, exit routes from the drop zones were changed to fly over Utah Beach, then northward in a 10 miles wide safety corridor, then northwest above Cherbourg. As late as May 31, routes for the glider missions were changed to avoid overflying the peninsula in daylight. Preparations IX Troop Carrier Command was formed in October 1943 to carry out the airborne assault mission in the invasion. Brigadier General Paul T. Williams, who had commanded the troop carrier operations in Sicily and Italy, took command in February 1944. The TCC command and staff officers were an excellent mix of combat veterans from those earlier assaults, and a few key officers were held over for continuity. The groups assigned to IXTCC were a mixture of experience. 4 had seen significant combat in the 12th Air Force. 4 had no combat experience but had trained together for more than a year in the United States. 4 others had been in existence less than 9 months and arrived in the United Kingdom 1 month after training began. 1 had experience only as a transport group and the last had been recently formed. Joint training with airborne troops and an emphasis on night formation flying began at the start of March. The veteran 52nd Troop Carrier Wing, wedded to the 82nd Airborne, progressed rapidly and by the end of April had completed several successful night drops. The 53rd TCW, working with the 101st, also progressed well but 2 of its groups concentrated on glider missions. By the end of April, joint training with both airborne divisions ceased when Taylor and Ridgway deemed that their units had jumped enough. The 50th TCW did not begin training until April 3 and progressed more slowly, then was hampered when the troops ceased jumping. A divisional night jump exercise for the 101st Airborne scheduled for May 7, Exercise Eagle, was postponed to May 11, May 12 and became a dress rehearsal for both divisions. The 52nd TCW, carrying only 2 token paratroopers on each C-47, performed satisfactorily although the 2 lead planes of the 316th Troop Carrier Group collided in mid-air, killing 14 including the group commander, Carl Burton R. Fleet. The 53rd TCW was judged uniformly successful in its drops. The lesser-trained 50th TCW, however, got lost in haze when its pathfinders failed to turn on their navigation beacons. It continued training till the end of the month with simulated drops in which pathfinders guided them to drop zones. The 315th and 442d groups, which had never dropped troops until May and were judged the command's weak sisters, continued to train almost nightly, dropping paratroopers who had not completed their quota of jumps. 3 proficiency tests at the end of the month, making simulated drops, were rated as fully qualified. The inspectors, however, made their judgments without factoring that most of the successful missions had been flown in clear weather. By the end of May 1944, the IX Troop Carrier Command had available 1,207 C-47 Skytrain troop carrier airplanes and was one-third over strength, creating a strong reserve. Three-quarters of the planes were less than 1 year old on D-Day, and all were in excellent condition. Engine problems during training had resulted in a high number of aborted sorties, but all had been replaced to eliminate the problem. All material requested by commanders in IXTCC, including armor plating, had been received with the exception of self-sealing fuel tanks, which Chief of the Army Air Forces Gen. Henry H. Arnold had personally rejected because of limited supplies. Crew availability exceeded numbers of aircraft, but 40% were recent arriving crews or individual replacements who had not been present for much of the night formation training. As a result, 20% of the 924 crews committed to the parachute mission on D-Day had minimum night training, and fully 3/4 of all crews had never been under fire. Over 2,100 CG-4 Waco gliders had been sent to the United Kingdom, and after attrition during training operations, 1,118 were available for operations, along with 301 airspeed Horsa gliders received from the British. Trained crews sufficient to pilot 951 gliders were available, and at least 5 of the troop carrier groups intensively trained for glider missions. Because of the requirement for absolute radio silence and a study that warned that the thousands of Allied aircraft flying on D-Day would break down the existing system, plans were formulated to mark aircraft including gliders with black and white stripes to facilitate aircraft recognition. Air Chief Marshal Sir Trafford Leigh-Mallory, commander of the Allied Expeditionary Air Force, approved the use of the recognition markings on May 17. For the troop carrier aircraft, this was in the form of 3 white and 2 black stripes, each 2 feet wide, around the fuselage behind the exit doors and from front to back on the outer wings. A test exercise was flown by selected aircraft over the invasion fleet on June 1, but to maintain security, orders to paint stripes were not issued until June 3. Opposing forces U.S. 7th Corps 82nd Airborne Division 101st Airborne Division, IX Troop Carrier Command 50th Troop Carrier Wing 52nd Troop Carrier Wing 53rd Troop Carrier Wing, German 7th Army 91st Air Landing Division 243rd Infantry Division 709th Infantry Division 6th Parachute Regiment, Pathfinders. The 300 men of the Pathfinder companies were organized into teams of 14 to 18 paratroops each, whose main responsibility would be to deploy the ground beacon of the Rebecca Eureka transponding radar system, and set out holophane marking lights. The Rebecca, an airborne sender-receiver, indicated on its scope the direction and approximate range of the Eureka, a responser beacon. The paratroops trained at the school for 2 months with the troop carrier crews. But although every C-47 in IXTCC had a Rebecca interrogator installed, to keep from jamming the system with hundreds of signals, only flight leads were authorized to use it in the vicinity of the drop zones. Despite many early failures in its employment, the Eureka Rebecca system had been used with high accuracy in Italy in a night drop of the 82nd Airborne to reinforce the 5th Army at Salerno. However, a shortcoming of the system was that within 2 miles of the ground emitter, the signals merged into a single blip in which both range and bearing were lost. The system was designed to steer large formations of aircraft to within a few miles of a drop zone, at which point the holophane marking lights or other visual markers would guide completion of the drop. Each drop zone had a serial of 3 C-47 aircraft assigned to locate the DZ and drop Pathfinder teams, who would mark it. The serials in each wave were to arrive at 6-minute intervals. The Pathfinder serials were organized in 2 waves, with those of the 101st Airborne arriving a half-hour before the first scheduled assault drop. These would be the first U.S. and possibly the first Allied troops to land in the invasion. The 3 Pathfinder serials of the 82nd Airborne were to begin their drops as the final wave of 101st Airborne paratroopers landed, 30 minutes ahead of the first 82nd Airborne drops. D-Day results. Efforts of the early wave of Pathfinder teams to mark the drop zones were partially ineffective. The first serial, assigned to DZA, missed its zone and set up a mile away near Saint-Germain-de-Varaville. The team was unable to get either its amber halophane lights or its Eureka beacon working until the drop was well in progress. Although the second Pathfinder serial had a plane ditch in the CN route, the remainder dropped 2 teams near DZC, but most of their marker lights were lost in the ditched airplane. They managed to set up a Eureka beacon just before the assault force arrived, but were forced to use a handheld signal light which was not seen by some pilots. The planes assigned to DZD along the Douve River failed to see their final turning point and flew well past the zone. Returning from an unfamiliar direction, they dropped 10 minutes late and 1 mile off target. The drop zone was chosen after the 501st PIR's change of mission on May 27 and was in an area identified by the Germans as a likely landing area. Consequently, so many Germans were nearby that the Pathfinders could not set out their lights and were forced to rely solely on Eureka, which was a poor guide at short range. The Pathfinders of the 82nd Airborne had similar results. The first serial, bound for DZO near Saint-Mire-Église, flew too far north but corrected its error and dropped near its DZ. It made the most effective use of the Eureka beacons and halophane marking lights of any Pathfinder team. The planes bound for DZN south of Saint-Mire-Église flew the mission accurately and visually identified the zone but still dropped the teams a mile southeast. They landed among troop areas of the German 91st Division and were unable to reach the DZ. The teams assigned to mark DZT northwest of Saint-Mire-Église were the only ones dropped with accuracy, and while they deployed both Eureka and BUPS, they were unable to show lights because of the close proximity of German troops. Altogether, 4 of the 6 drop zones could not display marking lights. The Pathfinder teams assigned to drop zones C and N each carried 2 BUPS beacons. The units for DZN were intended to guide in the parachute resupply drop scheduled for late on D-Day, but the pair of DZC were to provide a central orientation point for all the -717 Seychelles rupees radars to get bearings. However, the units were damaged in the drop and provided no assistance.